It gives me great pleasure tonight to introduce our speaker. He has spoken to us numerous times over the years, and it's always a pleasure to have him with us. Without further ado, an evening with Judge Chumley.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate that. Thank you for always having us. We always look forward to coming and enjoy coming and spending a little time with y'all. I hope y'all don't mind. I've taught college classes for a good many years. I was appointed to bench in 2009, but I've been teaching college as an adjunct for 20 years. 20 years now. It's kind of hard to keep up with it because it goes on a semester basis, you know. But I kind of walk around a little bit and talk as I walk. It helps me keep my mind moving, so I hope you don't mind me pacing back and forth. It's just kind of the way I do. But I appreciate it again. I thank Tom for inviting us. We love to come. We love genealogy. We love American history. Especially love government. Just to give you a little background about why I enjoy this type of thing. I graduated from Clemson. I went to Clemson. Graduated from there in 1992. And then I went to law school at Cumberland School of Law at Sanford University, which is in Birmingham, Alabama, and got my law degree there in 1997. I did practice law for a living because we have a family business, and so we got involved in that. And as I said, I taught college classes, which I enjoyed more than spending 50 hours a week in a law office, you know, riding wheels and that type of thing. So I did that for a while until I was appointed, and I've been doing the judge thing, primarily criminal law, for the past 10 years, which I enjoy doing. But I love government. My degree was in political science, and I always enjoyed studying about John Locke. John Locke's the kind of guy that I kind of think of as a friend, because everything he says is so easy to understand, or it is for me. He's one of my favorite philosophers. And Tom is always, he invites me to come speak all the time, and I think this is maybe the third or fourth time we've spoke. And he asked me to speak on John Locke, and I'm not exactly what you might call a John Locke expert by any stretch of the imagination, but I do like to talk about him, and there's some things I think are very important. He was such an important figure that, frankly, I'll call him a founding father, even though he never set foot on the North American continent. I still think he was a founding father because he was so influential over the founding fathers. And so we're going to bring a little bit of that out about him and kind of what his philosophy was and talk a little bit about that. And the way I do a lot of my talks is I like to make them as interactive as possible. So if you have something you'd like to throw in or comment on or ask a question about any time, just do it. We'll all talk back and forth. Sometimes that brings out a lot more information. Now, what do you know about John Locke? He lived most of his life in the 17th century, just a few years in the early part of the 18th century. He was primarily a doctor. Did y'all know that? He was basically an English doctor. And interesting thing about it, Lord Ashley, who was one of the Lords Proprietors for South Carolina, had a chance meeting with John Locke in 1666. John Locke performed an innovative and ingenious medical procedure in 1666 that actually saved Lord Ashley's life. And so his life from then on became sort of intertwined with this aristocrat, this nobleman. And so Lord Ashley had a project going at the time that we have come to recognize as the state of South Carolina. And as one of the Lords Proprietors, he got to know John Locke, appreciated him. He was a political philosopher. He wrote extensively on politics and on government, the science of government, and the philosophy of politics and the art of government. And so as Lord Ashley got to know him very well, he asked him to help with putting together a government for the state of South Carolina. Now, of course, back at that time, it was called Carolina, but I always like to specify that it was South Carolina because to me, that's my home. I like to bring that out. So the first constitution for this state, the state of South Carolina, was written by John Locke. And it was in 1669, and they called it the Fundamental Constitutions of Carolina. So this gentleman, who was an English philosopher, never came to the New World, he wrote the first constitution for the state of South Carolina. And it was very, very innovative, very liberty-oriented. It recognized the freedom of worship because South Carolina was founded in 1670, and so everything was in place by then. By the way, that's always, this is something that's an aside, but it's a corollary I want to mention. You ever see people walk around with these t-shirts or sweatshirts on and it says South Carolina since 1781 or 1787? Have you ever seen those shirts that say things like that? Y'all notice that? A lot of people have that, and it always blows my mind. Or since 1788, okay? South Carolina was a state long before 1788. It may have become a part of the Union in 1788, but it was a state long before then. So I always like to see the stuff say 1670. That's when South Carolina became a state. We've been around a lot longer than since 1788. And John Locke had a big part in that. Now, let's talk about the political philosopher first, okay? The most important thing that I think anybody can remember about Locke, or at least from a political standpoint, is his social contract theory. Now, the social contract theory is something that he expanded on. It's something that I always like to point out to my students when I teach on this. And it can be summed up by using Jefferson's words in the Declaration of Independence, where Jefferson said, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is pure John Locke. Those are his words. The only difference is John Locke said life, liberty, and property. Thomas Jefferson just decided to make it a little more flowery, to expand it a little bit, and include pursuit of happiness. But those are exactly John Locke's words. He heavily influenced Jefferson. And so those are the words that he used exactly in the Declaration of Independence. Now those are not the only words. There's all kinds of phrases that were Lockean that were used in the Declaration. Does anybody know of anything else in particular that was in the Declaration of Independence that was pure John Locke? You remember the part where Jefferson said that no people will throw off a government for light and transient causes? Okay, but when a long train of abuses is designed to reduce them to absolute despotism, then it's their right to throw off such government. Light and transient causes, again, those are exactly the words of John Locke. That's what he said. He said people are more inclined to endure while they can, and they won't throw off a government for light and transient reasons. All that's John Locke. So this is so heavily influenced on Jefferson that the Declaration of Independence would have been something that John Locke would have 100% agreed with. But social contract here. All right, life, liberty, and property. Now here's the purpose of government. What's the end of government? What is it? Well, Locke would say that government is itself a social contract. Okay? Now, if you take a contracts class in law school, there's a combination of things that you have to have a contract. You have to have an offer, you have to have acceptance, and you have to have consideration. If you have those three things, you have a contract. So a social contract is nothing more than an agreement between the people and their rulers. It's a social contract. And so here's the way Locke defines it. He says that, let's say you're in a state of nature. Okay? Without government, that's where we are, a state of nature. You think of the time where people were completely free to do anything they want. Okay, if there's no government, if there's no restrictions, if there's no rules, then people are totally 100% free. Anything you do is acceptable. Okay? Now that's great. The only problem with that is it's a dangerous and a worrisome existence, because if you're totally free, then everybody else is too. And since the majority of people are not inclined, as John Locke would say, to equity and fairness, then you've got to constantly worry these people are going to kill you and steal your property or take everything you have, because everything's free. They do anything they want. So Locke's theory is this. People are social. They will enter into a voluntary government. They'll give up a little of their freedom. Okay? Just a teensy little bit. In exchange, because that's what you get in a contract, get an exchange. In exchange for protection of your life, your liberty, and your property. Those are the three things that Locke says that every man wants protected. And so Locke would say that government has a very narrow purpose, as would Jefferson. And that narrow purpose is to protect you, protect your life. If somebody kills a loved one of yours, then it's government's job to punish the wrongdoer. Okay? If somebody tries to take away your liberty, to encroach upon your liberty, okay, then it's government's job to punish that wrongdoer. If somebody decides they're going to steal your property, then it's government's job to punish the wrongdoer. Okay? That's the social contract. So we all agree to give up a little of our freedom. We agree to leave our neighbor alone. We agree to not take anybody's life. We agree not to take anybody's property. So we're giving up, well, that freedom we would have in the state of nature in exchange for protection. So it's an agreement, it's a contract. That's the social contract, and that's exactly what government's role is. So what that does is it kind of brings in the question, well, what kind of government does Locke envision? Well, he thinks, like I said, that it's a very narrow scope. Okay? The goal is to promote your liberty. That's one of the things you want protected. You want the freedom. And so government, if it starts encroaching upon your freedom, then it's going beyond what it's supposed to do. And so we come to the question of what's a legitimate government? What's a legitimate assumption of power? What's a legitimate exercise of power versus an illegitimate exercise of power? And what do you do about it? Okay, that's the question that comes up with everything. So, this kind of brings us to a different question, or a different issue, I guess, and that is, let's go to talk about John Locke, the Christian. Now, this is an interesting topic because some people, and I have heard of some sources that actually try to portray Locke as a deist or a free thinker. Nothing could be further from the truth. John Locke was absolutely an evangelical Christian. He was Puritan in background. He was raised in a Puritan household, but he was always a strong Christian. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a little interesting story. I've done some history too. I'm a Southern Baptist, and I've done some history on the history of the Baptist Church. And so I've done a few little talks on that. And if you, we have any Baptists in here? They all, okay.
I was raised a Baptist.
There you go. All right. And see, none of them are sitting on the back row. You know, Baptists are always on the back row. Okay. Here's my family up here on the front row. We're Baptists. Okay?
I married a Methodist. So.
Okay. Well, interesting thing. If you're Baptist or you've heard about the Baptist faith and message, it's sort of a statement of faith. And the Baptist Church, or the Southern Baptist Convention, issued this in 1963. Well, they've reissued it several times. Well, there's a statement in the Baptist Faith and Message from 1963 that says, the Bible has God for its author, salvation for its end, and truth without any mixture of error for its content. Well, during a Baptist history class one time, a professor was asked, where did that sentence come from? There's no footnote. It's just in the Baptist Faith and Message. And this was sometime in the 80s. And so this professor decided to do some research on it and go back a little bit. And he went back and he found out that it came from the Baptist Faith and Message of 1925. So they just left it in there. But there was no footnote from there. So they had to go back a little further, and they actually went back to 1833 and found that the Baptist Church had taken it from the New Hampshire Confession of Faith of 1833. And it was the same sentence. But they didn't cite where it came from either. So they went back even further. And you know where they found it finally? It was in a letter that John Locke wrote in 1701, I believe. A young pastor, a young English pastor, had written a letter to the philosopher, the great philosopher, and he said, what should I do to grow my church and preach, and how do I make it a success? And John Locke said, preach the Bible. It has God for its author, salvation for its end, and truth without any mixture of error for its content. That was exactly, word for word, John Locke. So this guy's got an influence everywhere. It's not just in the Declaration of Independence, he's quoted in the Baptist Faith and Message. So you get to kind of find out where John Locke was thinking, where his thinking was coming from, because he was a Christian. Now, the question comes down to this. Anytime you discuss government and power, the question always comes down to the word sovereignty. The word sovereignty is always the beginning point, because whoever has sovereignty has the ultimate final say. They are sovereign. And that's who makes the final call. So, you're beginning to see how John Locke, the Christian, had this philosophy and this belief in government, and how he welded the two, and it became his belief and his philosophy. Okay, it's what he wrote about. And it's what so heavily influenced the Founding Fathers. If you go back and look at the founding fathers, of the ones who were most active in founding the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, the Bible most influenced them more than any other philosophical work. Okay? And so it certainly influenced John Locke. So the question about sovereignty is, how do you determine who has the final call? Okay, that always comes down to it. Now, we're going to get back to that a little bit more. But John Locke's theory is this, all right? The people have the power. Now, this was a developing concept in 17th century England, as you well know, because you had Charles I, the English monarch, who had believed in the divine right of kings, who said that he had been given the power to rule as king on earth by God, and to question him is essentially questioning God. And so the thinking was at that time in England was Rex Lex, the king is law. Whatever the king says is the law. You question the king, you're in danger of losing your head. That was sort of the theory behind it. And of course, Charles I ruled without Parliament a lot. Of course, things didn't go that well for Charles I. He wasn't really as bad of a monarch. I'm reading a biography on Charles I right now by a guy named Richard Cust, who was a British historian. And Charles I really, I think, tried to be a good man and tried to be a good king. But his philosophy just didn't wail with a lot of the people in England at the time. As you well know, the English Civil War broke out, and it ended up not going well for Charles. He lost his head. Okay? And so the parliamentarians won. Of course, later they brought back Charles II. So you've got this thing going on there between this question of divine right of kings. Do they have it? Do they have the authority to rule? Or is it the people's call? Okay? Well, John Locke said that the people had the ultimate say. And that they were the ones, the consent of the governed is what matters here. They're the ones giving their consent to the government. We're the ones, after all, they agreed to enter into a social contract, give up a little bit of our freedom, but as long as government protects our life, our liberty, and our property, we want them to stay out of our life. Okay? And so that's essentially what we want to happen. And that's Lockean. That's his philosophy. So the sovereignty, in his impression or his thinking, is with the people, not with the king. So you can see a transition, okay, to Locke throughout the 17th century from Rex Lex to Lex Rex. The law is king. The law is above the government. And in Locke's way of thinking, which is opposed to Thomas Hobbes, Locke's way of thinking is law precedes government. There's natural law, but right and wrong is fixed. You don't change that. Okay? Government doesn't create law, government finds law. That's Lockean. Okay? Right and wrong is already there. That's why he cited the Bible and cited morality and right and wrong. And so to Locke, he would say the government can do something wrong. Just because they issue a law doesn't mean it's legitimate. It doesn't mean it's the law. That's why we have this breakdown between what's called malum in se and malum prohibitum. Malum in se means something is just wrong because it's wrong. Okay? Malum prohibitum means it's wrong because the law says it's wrong. Okay? Locke would say if the government doesn't agree with the law, the government's wrong. And so that's a significant thing. This is something that took 1,000 years for us to develop through philosophers and through time. Now, you can see impacts and influences from John Locke in every part of government today, even one local government. I'll give you a prime example. Whenever we have a criminal case, and I as a criminal court judge, y'all are familiar with this. I think everybody's familiar with. You call cases the people versus Jones or the people versus Smith. Well, that's pure Lockean, because his thinking is that when a criminal violates a victim, they don't just violate one victim, they violate us all, because they have violated the social contract. They have not adhered to the contract. And so who punishes them? Not the individual, all of us, collectively, because the people have the sovereignty. We have the final say. So the whole format of criminal law is based on Locke's concept that the people have the right to adjust the problems and fix the problems. Now, Locke points back to Genesis. He talks about Cain. Y'all remember back in Genesis where Cain, of course, his sacrifice was unacceptable to God, and so he got mad about it and he killed his brother, became the first murderer. And so remember what happened then. Cain complained to God. He said, what am I going to do? Anybody who tries to find me will kill me. And so God said he'd put a mark on Cain so that anybody who tried to kill him would be punished. Okay? So Cain understood natural law. He understood that what he did was wrong, and that therefore people had a right to kill him in return. That's basically natural law. Okay? The wrongdoer is to be punished. To stop it from being an eye for an eye type thing, Locke said that that's why we have government. We have adjusted, settled, known laws which react and fix the wrongdoer. And they address the problem on behalf of the victim. In fact, two basic things criminal law does: reparations and restraint. Those are the two basic things. And that is exactly what John Locke says government's supposed to do: restrain the wrongdoer and make it right with the victim. And that's exactly what I do every day. When we have a criminal court case, if somebody comes in and something's been stolen from them, the first thing I ask them is I'll say, is there any restitution? If they're seeking restitution, they say, well sure, Your Honor, he stole my cell phone and broke it. Okay? Well, that's a criminal case. They'd be arrested for that. So then when they come to court, they tell me I want the price of the phone, so I'm giving you a phone. So frequently what I do is I award restitution and a fine, and then say that their prison time or their jail time is suspended based on the payment of the reparations or the restitution and the fine. That's what I do every day, and that's pure Lockean. Make the victim whole. That's what the system's supposed to do. Now, no system's perfect. Oftentimes the system doesn't do what it's supposed to do, but that's the idea. That's the job. That's what it's supposed to do. Now, I think that probably the best thing to do is to illustrate some of this stuff and show you kind of where Locke would go with some of these things. A little Latin phrase. I love these Latin phrases, and this is something that kind of sums it up, something that you can remember. Stare decisis is a Latin phrase, and what it means is things settled. And it is the way that our judicial system works. Okay, we know there's settled, known law. We know what the laws are. Okay, we have a right to know what the laws are. It's improper for you to be punished for something that you don't have the right to even know is a law. You have a right to know what the laws are. And so, therefore, you have a right to be charged and to know what you're being charged with. This is not a tyranny. This is not a dictatorship. The first thing you ask somebody when they come to court is, do you understand the charge against you? And that's the first thing I do is read the warrant to them. Make sure they understand what they're being charged with. Okay? And so this is all Lockean because he says this is settled, known law. People know what the rules are. They know this is where the line is. They know where the fouls are. They know what's fair. They know where, that way they know which side to stay on. Okay? Now, that's the way our entire system of precedent works. Whenever you take something to court, if you go to a trial court, and the trial court makes a ruling, you have the right to appeal. If you choose to appeal, what the appeals court is going to do is they're going to look at the record, okay? And they're also going to agree with previous decisions. That's stare decisis. They're going to adhere to precedent. And that's the common law system that's been in place for 1,000 years. It was developing and had pretty well developed by the time of John Locke's time. But this is what he illustrates, and that's what was carried over into America, is they go by precedent. That way you know what the rules are, and you can expect the court to rule in accordance with the rules. Now, what about this? What about the right to rebel? Do people have a right to rebel? Locke would say, yes, absolutely. Individuals don't have the right to rebel, but the people collectively do. Okay? One person can't go out here and say, you know what, I think this government's ridiculous, I'm just not going to obey it anymore. That won't work. Okay? Sorry. But the people themselves collectively have the right to define the law. And so that's the right to rebel. And so this makes for an interesting point. If you'll go back and look at the right to resist, look back in American history, one of my favorite periods of time, we were talking about it before it started a few minutes ago, was talking about the nullification period in American history. Now, South Carolina became the first state to nullify 'a federal law, and that was in 1832. John C. Calhoun had been vice president. He resigned as vice president. Calhoun, by the way, is probably the greatest political philosopher, in my opinion, this country's ever produced. Brilliant, brilliant man. His writings are amazing. And so he resigned to become senator. Robert Hayne, the senator, resigned to become governor. And so South Carolina, as you may remember from history, nullified the tariff of 1832. And so what would John Locke say about this? Okay, well, the way it happened is this, and if you look at the nullification ordinance, it was based on Madison and Jefferson's writings, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. They laid down the principle in 1798 and 1799 that if the federal government stepped out of its bounds and violated the Constitution, the question always becomes, well, who can stop them? Okay? If Congress, the President, Supreme Court violate the Constitution, are they bound by the Constitution? Let's first start with that question. Is the federal government bound by the Constitution? Absolutely. Doesn't mean they always adhere to it. But they are bound by the chains of the Constitution, as Jefferson put it. They're bound by the chains of the Constitution. Well, who holds them responsible if they violate it? Are they above it? The government's not above the law, are they? They can't be, because we know it's lex res. The law is king. The king's not above the law. If we asked Charles I today, he probably would say, yeah, the government is not above the law. Okay? Point's well made. So what if the federal government violates the Constitution? Well, Jefferson and Madison made it clear in 1798 and 1799 that the states, because they created the federal government, had a right, ultimately, to determine the constitutionality of a federal law or a federal action. What would John Locke say about that? Well, he would agree. If you look at his writings, he'd say that people have a right to resist. They have a right to resist. And now there was a question at the time that John Locke wrote this about violating peace and becoming somebody that encouraged violence. Locke makes the point, if you are enforcing the law, it's not violence. And this makes a great point. What about the policeman? If a policeman has to subdue a subject, okay, is it violence that the policeman uses? No, that's not violence. Violence is unjustified force. Okay, and that's pure law. Force to enforce the law or to punish somebody that's breaking the law is not violence. Okay, so if a state resists, for example, the people have the right to ultimately decide. And that, John Locke says, he says if there's a disagreement between the government, who is a representative of the people, and the people themselves, Locke makes it clear, the people have the final say. In other words, they have sovereignty. Sovereignty of the people. So, let me go ahead and close, and maybe if anybody's got any thoughts or comments, I'd love to hear from them if you like, but I've got a statement to finish before I close, and then just as I close, if y'all will bear with me, I'm going to introduce my wife. She's got a little comment, a little announcement she'd like to make. But in closing, let me say this. We hear a lot today about bullying. How many times have y'all heard stuff about bullying? You got grandkids in school or children in school, they're always talking about bullies, right? Okay? Well, what do? Okay, you got some kids are in school, they don't want to learn, they don't want to obey rules, they seem to like to do nothing but terrorize other kids, okay? They've always been bullies and there always will be. And they don't just come in the form of kids, they come in the form of adults and everything else too, so people can learn. So this is not new. So exactly what would John Locke say about bullying? I saw something today, as a matter of fact, we turned around up here in Simpsonville as we were coming through, and I saw a little karate school up here has these little after-school buses, and they had little things on the back of it that said bullying, and it had a circle around it and a line through it, okay? This is such a big thing, you hear about it all the time. So, is this just a current thing, or did John Locke talk about it? Well, he talked about it. He said, if the robber comes to hurt you or rob you, to resist is to obey the law. He said, it's not wrong to resist the evildoer. Okay? Well, by the same token, if somebody resists a bully, they're not the wrongdoer. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make a little criticism here. This is something that is a policy of public schools. You ask, every public school has this policy. And if there's any public school teachers in here, I apologize in advance if you disagree with me, but I think I can back it up. Public schools have this policy. It's called a zero tolerance policy. If there's a fight, everybody's punished. I have always thought that was stupid, and it is stupid. Okay? Because here's the deal. Let's say you're a law-abiding, peaceful student. You're there to learn. Some loser is over here pestering you to death day after day. And finally you say, look, I've had enough. Lay your hand on me or say another word to you, I'm going to knock you down. Okay? If that happens, the school wants to punish both parties. Apparently people in schools are not familiar with John Locke. Don't know anything about philosophy. Okay? If you resist the evildoer, you're the good guy. The job of the school is to investigate, find out who the aggressor is. That's who you punish, the aggressor. That's what the law does. That's what I do. Okay? If some people have a right of self-defense, if somebody comes into a courtroom and they say, Your Honor, I didn't hit this guy on purpose, he was attacking me. Well, then you have a right of self-defense. So do children, so do students. And John Locke simply says you have a right of self-defense. It's an ancient, fundamental, basic human right. How do you deal with a bully? You defend yourself. And you know what I found in the past? If somebody stands up to bullies, you know what they generally do? They back down. That's almost always the case. They learn their lesson quick. What tends to encourage bullies is people to passively not resist. Okay? And so this is what John Locke says. He says a world where peace is attained by any price is a world not living in, worth living in. Because who wants peace if you're basically a slave? Freedom, liberty, sometimes you have to take it. Okay? And that's what the Founding Fathers understood, and that's what they did. And that's why we have freedom today. That is to say what's left of it. We still have freedom in this country today. So that's kind of an overview of John Locke. Anybody got any thoughts or comments or anything? Maybe there's something that you would hope I'd maybe touch on that I didn't, or somebody just like to make a comment about anything at all? Yes,
Just
ma'am?
more clarification, you mentioned that John Locke was a Christian and that some people make him out to be a theist or didn't get that.
Free thinker.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I've heard that, but I don't think it's ever been backed up. All the evidence is overwhelming that he was an evangelical Christian. Absolutely. Good question, yes ma'am. Anything else? Yes, sir?
I saw that somewhere, I saw it written that he was the father of liberalism. That's not the liberalism that we know today, though, is it?
Well, great question. Great question. Yes, that's right. And you know, in their time, Jefferson was called a liberal at that time. The word didn't have the meaning that it has today. Basically, then they were asserting something that was still somewhat revolutionary. You know, that people have the right, or you have the right to resist an ancient regime, that type of thing. And so that at times seemed progressive. But because they expanded and felt like everybody had freedom, and that freedom was a natural, basic human right, that was considered to be a fresh way of looking at things. But it certainly wasn't. They would certainly be referred to, at Locke, I think, would be called your consummate conservative today. You know, his
I would
thing.
think so.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the terms have changed, just like parties have changed over the years. I would think probably a way to designate it, I mean, is certainly right-wing in his thinking, I guess is a way to put that, you know. But at the time in England, you know, he had opposed the Stuarts. He didn't care too much for Charles II's form of government. That way, they probably referred to him as a liberal, you know, sort of revolutionary. He supported the Glorious Revolution in 1688 when William and Mary came in. But yeah, I've heard that phrase, and that just does nothing but do exactly. I'm glad you brought that up because it illustrates how these terms, when you see these terms used, especially in historical works, you have to kind of dig a little bit and find out exactly what they mean by that. You know. Yes, sir.
Where'd you say he was from?
John Locke.
Yeah.
He was an English doctor.
So he didn't come to America, though. He stayed over there, right?
Right. He died in 1704.
He had any influence on Parliament?
Well, he was sort of what you might call a parliamentarian. He was Puritan in background. And of course, the parliamentarians were all Puritans that fought the English Civil War against Charles, Cavaliers. So, yeah, he would support Parliament and the people's right to elect their representatives. Yeah.
This one, the power was shifting from the king to the parliament during that period of history.
I think you can look at the English timeline from the time of the Norman Conquest, when William the Conqueror set up what we recognize today as the British monarchy, up to, the first 1,000 years after that. That timeline sort of shift, I think, from Rex Lex to Lex Rex, from the king is law to the law is king. The government is subject to the laws just like everybody else. And yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It took about a 1,000-year transition, I think.
So did he have much influence in England?
He was pretty influential. He was primarily a doctor. I guess you could say he was kind of a philosopher on the side, I guess is one way to put it. He wrote philosophy and enjoyed it, and he was a brilliant man. But he was, I guess, probably maybe in his time mostly known for being a doctor. That's certainly what got him became friends. That's what started his friendship with Lord Ashley, one of the Lord's proprietors of South Carolina. Yes, sir.
That caused trouble.
Oh, that's fine, yeah.
You mentioned Locke's quote was, individuals are entitled to life, liberty, and property.
Uh-huh.
Jefferson changed that to life, liberty, and this weird pursuit of happiness.
Right.
Do you feel that that was in some ways an error, that it would have been better that the Declaration of Independence said property, particularly as our founding fathers did not envision a democracy? They believed in people having to have an investment in the government, and so consequently had a property requirement for someone to be able to vote. So Jefferson sort of weakened what would have been individual rights and changing property to happiness. And in this day and age of, eminent domain,
Right.
where the government says, hey,
Right.
we need this for everyone else, where
Right.
that would have been a very solid right to say, sorry, you can't do that.
That's right. And let me address your question on the property issue. What exactly was Locke's view on property? He does say that the right to property, this is Locke, is not absolute. That no man has the right to take or use really or waste. In fact, that's kind of the way he sums it up. He says that man shouldn't waste anything or destroy anything, that the right to property is limited. And that's what Locke said even in his time. That probably gave rise to what we know as the takings clause in the Fifth Amendment, which of course is where eminent domain comes from. The Fifth Amendment, the federal Constitution, says that the government can take property, but they have to pay for it, and it has to be for public use. And so the founders put that in there as a narrow power. Some would argue, and I think some people would argue that it's being used too broadly now. But I think what Jefferson did when he used Pursuit of Happiness is he knew that when he was writing was a novel. The Declaration of Independence was new. There'd never been a country or a people before that had actually said, hey, we're going to fight a war, and this is why we're doing it. These are the reasons. And let facts be submitted to a candid world, that type of thing. So it was kind of new. So I think probably what Jefferson did is he made it a little more flowery. And I don't know that he intended, I really don't think he intended to, I don't think he intended for the Declaration of Independence to be taken literally in that regard, that everybody had the right to pursue complete happiness, do whatever they wanted. He just meant to say people are free, and he thought that sounded better. Just like Jefferson used one people have a right to dissolve the bands that connect them with another. But Jefferson never would have seen the United States as one big democracy. He never saw it that way, which is why he wrote the Kentucky resolutions, which passed the Kentucky legislature, when he said that the state has a right to nullify federal acts. Because he was always a states' writer. He was always a limited anti-federalist. So I think that probably, maybe the context maybe illustrates or maybe colors Jefferson's thinking on it. I think he was probably thinking about property and probably didn't mean to water down anything Locke was saying. Probably was just trying to make it all inclusive. It's kind of like a general statement, you know, is maybe one way of looking at it. Yes, ma'am?
You mentioned that definitions of terms have changed over time, and I think the way we interpret pursuit of happiness today is much different.
Oh, no doubt.
Jefferson defined it in 1776.
No doubt. And one thing, and that's exactly right, and one thing that you nailed, you're exactly right on, is the democracy idea. The founders, you know, they hated democracies, which is why James Madison had his famous phrase, which is one of my favorites. It says, if men were government, you know, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. You know, and so, in fact, Madison also said that democracies have often been as short in their lives as violent in their deaths. So they didn't have very high regard for democracies. They wanted a republic, you know, where people could get elected representatives. But it wasn't like a Athens or Sparta type democracy. You know, that's an excellent point right now. Yes, sir.
So would Locke agree with South Carolina being the first state to secede from the Union?
I think so. I think so. And I think that he, because the South Carolina would trace its reason, trace everything right back to the Kentucky-Virginia resolutions, which was Jefferson, and Jefferson was pure Locke. Yes, sir, I think so. All right, well, great. Thank you so much. I don't want to stay longer. I'd love to talk with you some more, but I'm going to go ahead and sit down. If there's something else somebody would like to talk about, I'd love to talk to you about it. But I want to ask my wife to come up. She has a little announcement that she'd like to make. And by way of introduction, I want to tell you about her. We've been doing a lot of genealogical research. And my wife has just found, just in the last few weeks, that she is a descendant of Dicey Langston, who y'all will find over here in the museum. Who was, in fact, she was, Dicey, as you well know, was, you know, the 14 or 15-year-old spy for the Patriots, and her family lived in southern Spartanburg. He was currently southern Spartanburg or northern Lawrence County now, right around the Tiger River. Now we live today a whole mile from the Tiger River, so we're still right there in that area. But she just found, and she's got exactly traced back. As a matter of fact, Dicey Langston's aunt became Williams. And that's my wife's maiden name. She was Williams. So she's got the direct line all the way down. So that's the introduction. So she's got a great revolution. And so I'm going to let her, she's got a little announcement she'd like to make to you, which won't take a minute. But thank y'all for having us.
Thanks y'all again for having us. We always enjoy coming. And like Rob said, I've been working on my lineage back to the Revolution, and I have mine back to the UDC, the United Daughters of Confederacy. So I've got my Confederate ancestry done, and on my dad's side, I've been working on the Revolution, and that's when I found out about Dicey. So we've been really excited about that. But my children are all members of the CFC, the Children of the Confederacy, and my youngest son is the division president, so he's statewide president. He had a date tonight. That's the only reason he got out there. So I guess if you're 17, and you know, but he has done. My daughter Georgia is the statewide chaplain, and my little one here is the page chairman this year. So she's the page chairman, and then our older son has aged out of CSC. He's in the SCV, Sons of Confederate Veterans, and we're going to try to start working on our the children of the American Revolution. We're going to work on that next. So we got our war between the states stuff done. But my son is raising money for the scholarship of the Children of the Confederacy. And I'm going to show y'all this. This is a drawing that Hampton did. I cannot draw like this. This is not my talent. I can brag about my children. That's talent, I guess. So he did that. And then my daughters made these tiles. We have Calhoun, as Rob was talking about a few minutes ago, and I've got Jefferson Davis, and I've got a lot of things in here. They made these in homeschool. We did all these. We made these. And if anybody would be interested, we take $5 donations. That's, you know, but every dime of it goes back to the scholarship. If we don't educate our children, then nobody else is going to do it. So, but that's all I want to say. I appreciate that. Thank y'all for having our family. Thank you.